The quietest person in the room is the one who has the most to say. You may have noticed it too. That woman in the back of the room who never raises her voice. That man who listens while everyone else is talking. That friend who smiles softly when everyone else is getting restless. We call them quiet. We call them discreet. And sometimes we underestimate them. But let me ask you a question right at the beginning of this conversation that we are going to share together. What is really going on inside these people? What is building silently behind observing eyes? What is patiently consolidating in these uncomplaining heart silence? Because today we are going to talk about something very special. We are going to talk about the moment when a quiet person understands certain things about themselves, about others, about life, and what this understanding changes in them. Not in a dramatic way, not in a violent way, but in a profound, lasting, and yes, in a certain sense, dangerous way. Dangerous because it becomes much more difficult to manipulate. Dangerous because it stops accepting what does not deserve to be accepted. Dangerous because it begins to truly live, rather than simply adapt. My name is Christophe André. I am a psychiatrist and psychotherapist. For many years I have been supporting women and men on their inner journey. I have written books on emotions, meditation, self-esteem, and the quiet strength that each person carries within. And what moves me most in this work is precisely that, the silent transformations, the moments when someone understands something, not with a bang, not with a spectacular revelation, but with the gentle certainty of someone who finally sees clearly. Today, I would like to accompany you in exploring this territory. I would like us to reflect together on what calm people carry within them, what they gradually understand, and how this understanding transforms them out. Whether you are a calm person yourself, or you know one, or whether you aspire to this inner serenity, I believe this conversation will resonate with you. Make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders relax. Breathe gently. We have plenty of time. Let's start at the beginning. Who are these calm people, really? Because I have to tell you something right away. Calm is not an absence. It is not a void. It is not indifference, nor passivity, nor resignation. Calm, true calm, the kind I want to talk about today, is something that is built. It is a form of inner presence that has often been vershort through trials, through chosen silences, through moments of great mood without breaking the azure. In my practice, I have met hundreds of people who describe themselves as calm. And very often, behind this calm, there was a story of a child who had learned very early on that restlessness was useless. A story of an adult who had decided one day to stop reacting to everything and start observing. A story of someone who had suffered in silence for a long time and who had found in this silence a form of refuge and then a form of strength. For many of these people, calm is not an innate. It is acquired. It is chosen. And that is what makes it so precious. Think of someone you know in your circle who embodies this quality. Someone who does not panic when faced with a stressful situation, who does not respond immediately when faced with an insult, who remains grounded, present, and stable in the face of general agitation. What do you feel when you observe this person? Admiration, perhaps? A form of envy sometimes. Or perhaps you tell yourself that this person is cold, that they don't feel the same way you do. Well, that's the first misunderstanding that I would like to clear up today. Calm people feel a lot. Often, they feel even more intensely than others. It's simply that they have developed a remarkable ability to not let their emotions govern their immediate reactions. There's a difference between feeling and reacting, and calm people have often learned the hard way to inhabit this space between the two. It's a precious space. It's in this space that right decisions are born. It's in space that character is forged, and it's in this space that the real transformation that I want to talk to you about today begins. Now, I would like to tell you something. A little story that I made up, of course, but that sounds like many true stories that I've heard. Imagine a woman. Let's call her Marie. Marie is 40 years old. She works in a large company. She has a family, friends, and a life that, from the outside, seems very full. Marie is known in her circle for her calmness. She is said to be composed, reasonable, and never gets carried away. And for a long time, Marie accepted this description with a certain pride. But one day, Marie begins to feel something, a kind of dull dissatisfaction. She doesn't know exactly where it comes from. She doesn't know exactly what she wants instead. But she feels that something in her life no longer resembles her, or perhaps never really resembled her. She begins to observe. She observes the dynamics around her. She observes how some people take advantage of her calmness, her ability not to react, to constantly ask for more from her, to encroach on her space, to assume that since she doesn't complain, everything is fine, afloat. She observes how her calmness, this quality that was envied in her, has somehow become a way for others to ignore her bliss. And one morning, Mary wakes up and she understands something very simple, but will change many things in her life. She understands that her calmness does not belong entirely to her, or rather that she has allowed her calmness to be used against her, that she has confused inner peace with the silent peace, with the silent acceptance of what should not be accepted. And from that moment on, something changes in her. She becomes, in a certain sense, dangerous. Not violent, not aggressive, but she begins to set limits. She begins to say no. She begins to choose what she accepts in her life and what she rejects. And those who are surrounded by her and who are used to her accommodating calm are suddenly disconcerted. Because there is one thing that calm people, when they awaken to their own strength, do better than anyone else. They change without making a sound. And that is what surprises others the most. This is the heart of what we are going to talk about today. This path that calm people travel when they understand certain essential truths about themselves and the world. This path has several stages, several stations. We will go through them together one by one. And at each stage, I will invite you to reflect on your own experience, your own life, your own patterns. The first station is understanding what their calm really is. As I was saying, the calm of the people I am talking about is not indifference. It is something much richer, much more complex, much more complex. In psychology, we often talk about emotional regulation. It is the ability to manage these internal emotional states, to not be overwhelmed by them, to be able to remain functional, even in difficult situations. But emotional regulation in its deepest and healthiest form is not the suppression of emotions. It is their integration. Integration. It is learning to feel what we feel, to recognize it, to give it a space, and then to decide how we are going to respond to it. Calm people often develop this ability intuitively. Sometimes because they grew up in environments where torment was omnipresent, and they learned to find their balance within. Sometimes because they went through trials that taught them that losing self-control was useless, that the storm within did not change the storm outside. And at first, this ability is perceived by others as a form of wisdom. And in a sense, it is. But there's a trap that many calm people fall into, and this trap is subtle. The trap is to confuse self-management with management for others. It is to tell yourself that since you are capable of not reacting, it is better never to react. Then since you can absorb, you must absorb everything. That since you are standing, you must be the pillar on which everyone always leans without reciprocity. I have seen this trap work in so many patients. These men and women who came to see me exhausted, not because they lacked inner resources, but because they had put all those resources at the service of others, though, without ever using them for themselves. Let me ask you a question. Does this resonate with you? Do you recognize this pattern in yourself or around you? This way of being available to everyone, of managing other people's advices, of keeping the peace in groups while gently, silently neglecting your own needs, doubly. If so, I want you to know that this is not a weakness, it is a form of generosity that may have become misconfigured. Yeah. And the good news is that this configuration can change. And when it changes, something beautiful and powerful happens. The first understanding that calm people have when they begin their journey of awakening to their own strength is this: my calm is a resource, not a service. My calm is mine. It is mine, and I can choose how I use it. This realization may seem simple, perhaps even obvious when you hear it put like this. But in practice, in everyday life, it changes everything. It changes the way we get up in the morning. It changes the way we respond to the requests of others. It changes the way we perceive ourselves. And that is where the transformation I was talking about at the beginning begins. Silent, gradual, profound. Let's take a few moments to breathe. Stay with what you have just heard. Let it settle within you. Understanding does not always happen immediately. Sometimes it comes slowly, like light streaming through a window on a spring morning. If what you have heard since the beginning of this discussion resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so that you'll continue to receive these reflections, these explorations of the inner world, and you will not miss out any of our future conversations. And consider leaving a like if you feel like it. It's a simple way of telling me that you're here, that you hear me, and that this path we're walking together makes sense to you. Let's continue. The second step on this path is understanding the difference between peace and surrender. This is a fundamental distinction. I would even say it's the heart of the topic we're exploring today, because many quieter people have often unconsciously learned to confuse the two. Peace, true peace, is an inner state. It's the ability to stay in tune with oneself, to be present, to not be consumed by anxiety or resentment. Peace is something that we cultivate within ourselves, regardless of external circumstances. It's what wisdom traditions around the world have sought to describe for millennia, and it's what contemporary psychology calls emotional stability. This is surrender, on the other hand, is something very different. Surrender is when we give in, not because we have chosen peace, but because we are of conflict. It is when we say yes when we mean no. It is when we let an injustice go unchallenged, not because we have accepted it internally, but because we do not know how else to respond to it. It is when we remain silent, Not because we choose to remain silent, but because we are afraid of the consequences of speaking out. And the problem with surrender is that it appears calm on the outside. Outside, it looks like serenity. The person is not shouting, is not agitated, is not making a scene, but inside, something is quietly rumbling, something is building up. A disappointment, a frustration, a resentment that cannot find expression. I have a term for this. Not a clinical term, but an image that I like very much. I call this cold anger. It is not the hot, explosive, visible anger, the kind that can be seen and managed. It is the anger that builds up layer by layer like snow on a roof. On the surface, everything is white, clean, and peaceful, but the weight accumulates, and one day, the roof gives way. Calm people who have not yet made the distinction between peace and surrender are particularly vulnerable to this phenomenon. They think they are coping well, they think they are above the fray, but in reality, they are accumulating. And when they finally react, often after years, the reaction can surprise everyone, including themselves. You may have experienced something like this. That moment when, for a seemingly tiny reason, something inside you break, or we know that it is not at all the small reason of the moment that is the cause, it is everything that has accumulated before. The seat, the straw that breaks a camel's back, that has been full for a long time. The path to true peace for calm people inevitably involves this learning process, distinguishing between chosen peace and surrender. And once this distinction is internalized, something remarkable happens. The person begins to approach difficult situations not with avoidance, but with calm engagement. They approach difficult conversations not with aggression, but with clarity. They set boundaries not with anger, but with dignity. And this, I tell you, is one of the most powerful things I have observed in my career. The shift from a defensive, fragile peace based on avoidance to an active, robust peace based on self-knowledge and self-respect. Now let's talk about something that I think is incredibly important to understanding today's topic. Let's talk about what I call emotional readability. Emotional readability is the ability to be read by others, to clearly convey what you feel, what you want, what you accept, and what you don't. It's a kind of trance of your inner landscape. And calm people often have low emotional readability. Not because they lack inner depth, quite the contrary, but because they have put emotions very close to themselves, not to expose them, to maintain a serene facade no matter the circumstances. The problem with low emotional readability is that it can be misinterpreted. Others may assume that you are fine when you are not. They may assume that you agree when you are not. They may assume that you do not need help when you do. And gradually, insidiously, this low readability can lead to a form of invisibility. The calm person becomes the one who doesn't get worried, because apparently they never need anything. I remember a conversation I had with a patient, a man in his 50s, whom I'll call Thomas, i.e. Calmus. Thomas had come to see me for depression, as real deep depression, that he had caught himself in. He didn't understand how he could have gotten there, he who was so balanced, so stable, so calm. Over the course of our sessions, Thomas told me his story. A whole life spent being the rock, the one others leaned on. The one who managed family crises, dark tensions at work, friends in difficult moments. The one people overshadowed first because he would panic, because he would know what to do. And one day, I asked Thomas a very simple question. I asked him, when was the last time someone asked you how you were doing? Man. There was a long silence, and then Thomas smiled, a slightly sad smile, and said, I don't know, for a long time. That smile touched me deeply, because it contained both the understanding of a truth and the pain of that truth. Thomas had spent years being indispensable to others, and no one had it necessary to check on him too. Not because others were bad or selfish, but simply because Thomas had never let on that he might not be okay. His poor emotional readability had cost him something essential, the ability to be seen, truly seen, and to be supported in return. The work that Thomas and I did together over several months consisted largely of helping him develop this readability, learning to say, I'm not okay, learning to let others see his vulnerability, learning that strength does not mean imperviousness. And what Thomas said to me at the end of our work together is something I will never forget. He said, I thought that showing my fragility would make me weaker. In reality, it did the opposite. It made me more human. And being more human made me stronger. I offer this sentence to each of you because I believe it contains a profound truth that many quiet people need to hear. Your strength is not in imperviousness. Strength is weg to face, and the and sometimes the most powerful response is share the vulnerability alafa. Let's move on to another dimension of our topic. Let's talk about what quiet people understand about power dynamics in relationships, because that's where their transformation really becomes, in a good way, dangerous for those who would continue to take them for granted. Human relationships, whether romantic, familial, friendly, or professional, are all permeated by power dynamics. This is not necessarily something negative. Power in a relationship is not domination. It is the ability to influence, to decide, to say no, to say yes, yes. It is the ability to make yourself heard and to hear the other person. In healthy relationships, there is a balance of these dynamics. Each person has a voice. Each person can assert themselves. Each person is taken into account. But in many relationships, this balance is disrupted and quiet. People often find themselves on the side of those whose voices carry less weight. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned to keep quiet. I would like to explore with you some of the most relationship patterns that quiet people find themselves in, and what changes when they begin to understand these dynamics. First pattern is what I call the absorption relationship. In this pattern, one person absorbs the emotional energy of another. They listen, they comfort, they advise, they support. And the other person takes and takes without ever really giving back. This is not necessarily malicious. The other person may not even realize what they are doing, but the imbalance is real. Calm people are particularly chosen to this role of absorber and are particularly targeted by those who need to be absorbed because who need to not. Because they do not complain. Because they seem like they can handle it, because their calmness is an implicit invitation to lay down their burdens. The moment a calm person realizes that they are playing this role and chooses to no longer play it unconditionally is a moment of great power ashuto. They do not become cold, they do not become selfish, they simply become aware. They begin to choose their commitments. They begin to offer their support deliberately rather than out of flex or fear. The second pattern is what I call the relationship of constant proof. is a relationship in which the quiet person feels like they must constantly prove their worth, justify their place, and earn the love or recognition they receive. They work harder than others, give more than others, and step aside, so that the other person can shine. This pattern is particularly painful and particularly insidious because it's often camouflaged under the appearance of goodwill, dedication, and altruism. And quiet people, who are often highly sensitive to the needs of others and tend to put their own needs second or easily fall into this trap. The awakening in this case can be brutal. It is often a moment when a person suddenly realizes that all their efforts have gone unnoticed, or worse, that they have been taken for granted. And that is when they understand something fundamental. Their worth is not something that can be proven. It is something that can be affirmed. This understanding, I tell you, is transformative. It radically changes the way we position ourselves in these relationships. We no longer stop deserving what we should simply receive. Instead, we choose to be in relationships where we are seen for who we are without having to constantly perform our worth with others. I would like to pause here, not in our ongoing conversation, but in the flow of these ideas, to point something out to you. If you are looking to delve deeper into these reflections, to go deeper into knowing yourself and your relationship dynamics, I invite you to look at the QR code that appears on the screen right now, or to visit the link in the description of this video. You will find a selection of very interesting books on personal development, psychology, self-knowledge, and inner life. These are not my books, I should point out, but works that can very usefully accompany this path of reflection that you have begun. Take the time to take a look if you wish. It is an invitation, not an obligation. Like everything we are talking about today. Let's get back to it. The third relationship pattern that calm people begin to understand is what I call the relationship of fear disguised as respect. This is perhaps the most subtle of the three and the most important. There are relationships in which we stay not because we love them, not because they nourish us, but because we are afraid to leave. Fear of the conflict that leaving would cause us, fear of the loneliness that would follow, fear of the judgment of others, fear of disappointing. And calm people who naturally avoid conflict and who are often acutely sensitive to the emotions of others can stay for a very long time in situations that no longer suit them, simply because they do not want to create waves. They call it wisdom, patience, and forbearance. But sometimes it is nothing more than fear. A soft fear, well-dressed, that looks like a serenity on the outside. The moment when a calm person understands this difference, when they honestly ask themselves if what they call acceptance is not actually fear, is a moment of extraordinary courage, because facing your own fears requires much more courage than facing someone else's. And once this understanding is there, something shifts. The person no longer runs away from their fears. They look at them, they name them, and by naming them, they begin to overcome them. I know a woman, let's call her Sophie, who came to see me a few years ago. So Sophie was in a very difficult professional relationship with her supervisor. Whoa. The latter was demanding, sometimes unfair, and tended to take credit for Sophie's work. But Sophie stayed. She continued to work hard, not to smile, and not to complain. When I asked her why she didn't talk to her superiors, why she didn't look for something else, she said, "I don't want to create problems. I prefer peace." And I asked her a question, gently. I said to her, "Sophie, Is that really peace you're feeling, or is it something else? There was a long silence. And then Sophie said with an honesty that touched me, no, it's fear. It's fear. I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I say something. That moment of recognition was the beginning of a long process for Sophie. A process of distinguishing her true serenity, the one she could choose, from her fear disguised as serenity. And gradually, she learned to act from her values rather than her fears. It's not an easy path. I won't tell you it's simple, but it's a path that leads somewhere beautiful. Let's give everything we've just explored a moment to breathe. We've talked about calm as a resource, the distinction between peace and surrender, emotional haute clarity, and the release patterns that calm people often find themselves in. Now, I would like to go further. I would like to talk to you about what actually happens when a calm person begins to awaken to their own power. Because there is something very special about this transformation. It is unlike anything else. It is not like the transformation of someone impulsive who learns to control themselves. It is not like the transformation of someone anxious who learns to reassure themselves. It has its own characteristics, its own challenges, its own beauties. The first characteristic of this transformation is that it is often invisible to others, at least at first. Let us remember that calm people change without making a sound. When they begin to transform themselves internally, the people around them do not notice it right away. The person is always calm, always composed, always pleasant. But internally, something has been reorganized. Priorities have changed. Boundaries have become clearer. Values have become clearer. It is only gradually, through subtle signs, that others begin to perceive that something has changed. The person declines an invitation that they would have accepted before without much explanation. They respond to a request with a calm no, where they would have automatically said yes. They step back from a conversation that would have previously absorbed them entirely, and these subtle signals can disconcert those who had not realized to what extent they were counting on the predictable behavior of the calm person. The second characteristic of this transformation is that it is progressive and not linear. It is not a single moment of revelation. Although sometimes there are pivotal moments, it is an accumulation of small realizations, small different choices, small moments of being true to oneself, to husband oneself, 2 steps forward in one, moments of doubt, moments of clarity. And this is completely normal. The path of personal transformation is never a straight line. It is more like a spiral. Sometimes we return to the same places, the same questions, the same challenges, but we return with a slightly different perspective, with a little more understanding, a little more gentleness towards yourself. I want to tell you something important here. If you are in this transformation, if you have begun to understand certain things about yourself and you feel that the path is long and sometimes difficult, I would like to encourage you not to judge yourself, not to tell yourself that you should go faster, understand faster, change faster. Deep transformation is not a race, it is a maturation. And like all maturation, it requires time, patience, and a lot of unkindness towards oneself. The third characteristic of this transformation, and perhaps the most surprising, is that it does not eliminate gentleness. On the contrary, many quiet people are afraid that if they start asserting their boundaries, saying no, claiming their space, they will become hard, cold, difficult to love. They are afraid of losing this quality of gentle presence that characterizes them. But what I have observed again and again in my clinical work is exactly the opposite. Quiet people who learn to assert themselves do not become less gentle. They become more authentically gentle because their gentleness is no longer tinged with fear or obligation. It is freely chosen from within. There is a huge difference between imposed gentleness, the kind that comes from fear of conflict or the need to be loved at all costs, and chosen gentleness, the kind that comes from a genuine desire for kindness toward others. Former is exhausting. It feeds on itself like a fire that burns the wood on which it rests. The latter is regenerative. It feeds on its own deep roots and can give without draining itself. It is this transition from imposed gentleness to chosen gentleness that is perhaps the greatest gift that the calm person gives to themselves when they awaken to their own strength. If you have enjoyed what you have heard since the beginning of our conversation, please do not forget to like and subscribe to this channel. It is an easy way to stay in touch, to continue receiving these reflections, and also to let me know that the work makes sense to you. And if anyone you know could benefit from this conversation, feel free to share it with them. Now let's talk about another essential aspect of our topic, the issue of anger in calm people. Because, yes, calm people also have anger. And this is something I want to explain to you with a lot of nuance because it is often misunderstood. Anger is a fundamental human emotion. Its function is to signal to us that a line has been crossed, that an injustice has been committed, that something is not acceptable. Anger, in its healthy form, is a mobilizing emotion. It encourages us to take action to put things right. But there are many ways to express or not express anger. And calm people have often developed a very special relationship with this emotion. For many of them, anger is a fearful emotion. Perhaps because they grew up in an environment where the anger of others was destabilizing or even dangerous. Perhaps because they have associated anger with loss of control, ugliness, something that is not like them. They have learned to confront to convert it into something else sometimes. To convert it into something activity. Sometimes we and this phenomenon, this transformation of anger into something else, can last a very long time without the person realizing it. Because on the outside, everything is fine. The person is calm, pleasant, functional. But inside, the anger is still there. It has not disappeared. It has simply shifted, and the consequences of this shift can be significant on physical health. Sometimes because emotions that are not expressed tend to express themselves differently. On psychological health also, because chronically suppressing a fundamental emotion requires considerable energy. And finally, on relationships, because unexpressed anger still creeps into interactions in a passive, indirect, and sometimes no way. So, what do calm people learn to do? How do they deal with their anger as they begin to awaken to their own power? They learn to listen to it without amplifying it. They learn to say, I feel anger inside me. What is it telling me? What boundary has been crossed? What need has been disrespected? And how do I want to respond to it? It's a very different approach than the impulsive reaction, of course, but it's also very different from chronic suppression. It's a third voice. The conscious acceptance of emotion followed by a chosen response. And the beauty of this approach for calm people is that it allows them to use the anger as valuable information without being dominated by it. They can assert themselves, set boundaries, and express disagreement while remaining fundamentally themselves, while remaining calm. That, to me, is one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. This ability to fully inhabit one's emotions, including the most difficult ones. Okay. Without losing track of oneself. I'm going to tell you another short story. The story of a man I'll call Pierre. Pierre was a quiet family man, a valued colleague, a reliable friend. Everyone liked Pierre because he never made a fuss. Pierre never got angry. Pierre always found a way to solution, always a way of fixing things. One day, after a professional meeting where a colleague had once again interrupted him and had attributed to himself an idea that had come from Pierre, something changed in him. Not an explosion, not a crisis. Simply, as he left that meeting, Pierre felt something that was unusual for him, a cold clarity, a quiet determination. The next day, Pierre went to see his colleague, not to attack him, not to accuse him, but simply to tell him calmly and clearly, I want to talk about what happened yesterday. This idea was mine. I would like us to agree on this. The conversation was not easy. The colleague first denied it, then minimized it. But Pierre remained calm. He repeated his position. He did not raise his voice. He did not tremble. And finally, something happened. The colleague half admitted that Pierre was right. What touched me most in what Pierre told me was, this is what he said afterwards. He told me, I haven't changed. I was still me, but I was me standing tall. I was me standing tall. I think that's one of the most beautiful descriptions I've heard of what it means to assert yourself without losing your composure. To be yourself, but standing tall. That's the potential that all calm people have within them. This ability to remain entirely themselves and at the same time to no longer let themselves be erased. Let's now address a topic that I consider to be a fundamental pillar in this exploration. The question of self-esteem in calm people. Self-esteem is a topic that I have explored extensively in my books and in my clinical practice. And I want to share with you some important thoughts on how calm people experience and build, sometimes don't, build, their self-esteem. To clarify things, from the outset, self-esteem is not arrogance. It is not the certainty of being perfect, nor the conviction of always being right. Healthy self-esteem is something much more modest and much deeper, and doozy at the same time. It is the fundamental conviction that I deserve to exist, that I have value, that my well-being matters, and that I can face life's challenges. And calm people often have a complex relationship with their self-esteem. On the one hand, they often have a fairly positive image of their ability to manage difficult situations, to remain stable, and to support others. But on the other hand, they sometimes have a rather fragile image of their own intrinsic value, of their right to occupy space, to have needs, and to receive as much as they give. This dissociation is interesting. It creates a person who trusts themselves in terms of their skills, but doubts in terms of their legitimacy, who knows they can do things, but sometimes wonders if they really have the right to be logic. And this fragility of legitimacy is often exploited, consciously or not, by those who gravitate around calm people. Because someone who doubts their legitimacy to receive will not easily claim it, Someone who does not believe they are entirely legitimate to occupy space will naturally shrink back to room for others. The understanding that transforms calm people at this level is recognition that their value is not conditional, that It is not linked to what they do, to what they give, to the usefulness they represent for others, that it is inherent. That they have value simply because they exist. This recognition may seem simple, but for many people it is an inner revolution, because an entire life can be built on the implicit pattern. I want what I do for others, and undoing this pattern, replacing it with something more solid and more just, itu rust, is a long-term task. When this work is done, when the calm person begins to inhabit this conviction, my value is intrinsic, something remarkable happens in all of their relationships. They stop overgiving to compensate for imagined lack. They begin to receive with greater ease, better ease. They are less willing to accept situations where they are undervalued or mistreated. And they do so not in anger or protest, but in a kind of quiet clarity. This quiet clarity is perhaps one of the most accomplished forms of what we call, in this context, the dangerousness of calm people. Not dangerous to others. Dangerous to all the systems, all the dynamics, all the relationships that were feeding off their lack of self-esteem. Let's take a moment to pause on our journey. We've covered a lot of ground together. We've explored calm as a freeze or the distinction between peace and surrender, sabasturi more, emotional readability, relational patterns, progressive transformation, anger, and now self-esteem, udara self-esteem, halos. And we haven't seen it all yet. If anything you've heard so far has resonated with you, if something has made you raise an eyebrow, smile, or even give you a little tug at your heartstrings, I encourage you to take a moment to notice those resonances, not necessarily now, but afterward. Because the understanding that touches you isn't always the one that's intellectualized. Sometimes it's just a feeling, And if you haven't already, I encourage you once again to subscribe. That way, we can continue this journey together, and you want the next conversation I have for you, but kuntive. Let's continue our exploration. Now, I want to talk to you about something at the heart of today's topic, and what I want to call the awakening of discernment. Discernment is the ability to distinguish, to see clearly, to not confuse what's good for you and what's not, what's worthy of engagement and what's not, what is a real emergency and what is simply presented as an emergency to obtain our compliance. People who are calm on their path of awakening develop extraordinary discernment, and this is perhaps one of the most powerful things that happens within them. This discernment develops because calm people observe. They have always observed. It is one of their fundamental characteristics. But in the beginning, they observed without acting. They saw, they understood, but they did not translate this understanding into action, either out of fear or out of habit or out of a form of excessive modesty. When discernment begins to be coupled with action, something very special happens. The person begins to see patterns where others do not yet see them. They begin to recognize subtle manipulations, toxic dynamic situations that do not suit them well before the damage is visible. And this early discernment, combined with the ability to act on it without drama, without explosions, simply with clarity, is something that can stoop in others, to others, these or others. Let me give you a concrete example. Get that. Imagine a business meeting. Someone presents an idea and seeks approval. There are several types of people in the room. The enthusiasts, who immediately agree. The skeptics, who loudly express their doubts. And then there is the quiet person, the one who listens, who observes, who doesn't say much. But behind that silence, something is happening. The quiet person has noticed the way the idea was presented. She has noted the omissions, the gray areas, the questions that weren't at that asked. She has observed the dynamics in the room. Who is trying to please who? Who is afraid of what? And when she speaks, if she speaks at all, it is with a precision that can be surprising. She doesn't graphic or dramatize. She simply asks a question or makes an observation that puts her finger on something that no one else has seen or dare to name. This moment of quiet clarity brought to the level of speech is a moment of great power. And those who experience it for the first time, who see the calm person in their circle acting like this, may be surprised. They weren't expecting this. They were used to their silence, their discretion. And suddenly there's an unstoppable clarity. This is the danger of calm people in the deepest sense of the word. Not a threat, not an aggression, but a clarity that cannot be ignored. Let's now explore an area that is particularly close to my heart. Question of solitude and the chosen solitude of calm people. Calm people often have a special relationship with solitude. In general, they feel comfortable there. They need time alone to recharge their batteries, to think, to find themselves. This is not misanthropy. It is not a rejection of others. It is simply a way of being that requires moments of inner contemplation. Hey, Mavi. And in our hyper-connected world, this can be misinterpreted. We might think that a calm person is distant, even antisocial. And we might wonder if they are okay if something is wrong, when often the exact opposite is true. They are doing very well. They are nourishing themselves internally. But there is also a less chosen form of solitude that calm people can experience. A solitude that comes from feeling misunderstood, from having the impression that they're in a world so rich, so active, so nuanced, is not accessible to others, that superficial conversations bore them, that the depth they seek in exchanges is rare. This solitude can be painful. It can create a feeling of isolation that paradoxically coexists with the fact that they are surrounded, appreciated, and sought after. The understanding that accompanies the awakening of calm people at this level is that they do not need to conform to ways of relating that do not suit them. They can seek out and find people who can truly meet them. Not in droves, perhaps. Maybe just a few, maybe just a few, but real encounters, real connections, exchanges that truly nourish them. And this search for quality rather than quantity in relationships, a form of wisdom that calm people often develop earlier than others because they have a keen sensitivity to authenticity. They sense when a relationship is real and when it is not, and gradually they learn to choose accordingly. This choice of relational quality can sometimes lead to sorting out the social circle. People distance themselves because the dynamic link to the calm person, often an unbalanced dynamic, no longer works. And new people arrive, attracted precisely by this authenticity, this depth, this true presence. This process can be painful at first. Losing relationships, even relationships that were not really good for you. It is never trivial. But the calm people who have gone through it have almost unanimously told me that on the other side there is something much more precious, a less lonely solitude, fewer but infinitely richer connections. Let's talk now about something I want to call the power of slowness. In our world, that values speed, responsiveness, and immediate calm people have something that may seem like a handicap, but is actually an extraordinary asset to better. They take their time. They take the time to think before responding. They take the time to observe before acting. They take the time to understand before judging. And this deliberate slowness in a fast-paced world can be perceived badly. They may be seen as slow, hesitant, and unsure of themselves. But what this slowness produces is something extremely valuable: better decisions, more accurate responses, actions that are more aligned with their deepest values. Think about this. In a difficult situation, in a moment of crisis or tension, who makes the best decisions? Often, it's the one who has the ability to slow down, to step outside of the automatic reaction, to create that space between the stimulus and the response that I was talking about earlier. And calm people naturally have a greater ability to inhabit that space. They don't need to decide right away. They can wait. They can sleep on it. They can let things settle. This power of slowness becomes particularly visible and particularly valuable in pressure situations. When everyone around them is agitated, when everyone is demanding immediate decisions, the calm person who has understood and integrated their own way of functioning can offer something that no one else in the room can. Lucidity untainted by panic. And this lucidity, combined with the capacity for action that the calm and alert person develops, is a formidably effective combination. A combination that many in their professional and personal lives come to recognize and respect. I now want to address something that I think is important in our conversation. Portion. The question of courage and fear. Because I want to deconstruct a myth. The myth that calm people aren't afraid or shouldn't be afraid because they're calm. The truth is that calm people have fears, like everyone else, often very deep fears. But their relationship to fear is different. They don't make as much noise about it. They don't show it as much, which can create the illusion that they're fearless. But true fearlessness isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to act despite fear. This is what the English-speaking world sometimes calls quiet courage, the clod of courage. And this is something that calm people develop remarkably when they try to use their own power. They learn to recognize their fear, to say to it, I see you, I feel your presence, and I'm going to move forward anyway. This inner dialogue, this act of acknowledging fear without letting it take over, is a daily act of courage, discreet, invisible to others, but extremely significant. What experiencing it. And this quiet courage gradually grows stronger. Every time we act in spite of fear, every time we choose what we believe is right rather than what is comfortable, something is consolidated inside. A feeling of capability, of reliability towards ourselves. A confidence that does not come from the approval of others, but from the knowledge of our own inner coherence. This confidence is particularly strong because it does not depend on external circumstances. It does not depend on the opinions of others. It comes from within that private space where the person knows who they are, what they are, why they are ready to stand up. It is a confidence that calm people deserve, and that many of them have not yet fully recognized in themselves. If what you hear touches you, remember that you can explore this further. The link in the description of this video offers reading resources, books on psychology, self-knowledge, and personal development that can complement The path you've begun. These are not my books, but rather works that I believe are useful for supporting this type of reflection. Take a look at them at a time that suits you. Let's now move on to something I call the self-kindness revolution. Self-kindness, or self-compassion as it is sometimes called in psychological literature, is one of the topics I have worked on, thought up about,